Hello and welcome to Season 5, Episode 2 of the Voiro Podcast. We are very excited to have our guest today, Varadha Raghunathan, who is the Head Monetization and Customer Engagement at BigBasket. Varadha has been a friend of ours for a few years now, and every time we meet him, we have the most fascinating conversation. And both at BigBasket as well as through his career at the Times Group, Amazon, and now at BigBasket, he spends his time working at the intersection of technology and psychology. And as Varadha says, magic truly happens at this intersection. So we're very excited to have a conversation with Varadha today. Welcome to the Voiro Podcast, Varadha. It's so nice to have you. How are you doing?
Doing very well. Thanks, Anand. It's good fun to be here.
Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. We've known you for a while now, and we've always had such exciting conversations. I don't know if you know this, but every time we have a conversation with you, we go back and chat about it because there's always something insightful you tell us,
I
depending
don't
on where
know.
you're coming from or
Mm,
where you've been.
mm.
And what I'm particularly excited about today is I feel like I'm picking up from 2 episodes ago, which
Yeah,
was a conversation with Lava Kumar from Entropic, where we broke down the intricacies of attention and how it impacts advertising and kind of how it's actually a very important component. Um, we were looking into your background as one does as we prepare. We looked at your LinkedIn and I noticed two interesting things. One is you have a line up there that says magic truly happens at the intersection of technology and psychology.
yeah,
And I'm hoping we can break that apart in today's conversation. But we were also looking at your journey from the Times Group, or Bennett Coleman and Company, to Amazon to BigBasket. And I feel like the timeline of your journey coincides with a very dramatic shift in the Indian consumer's behavior.
yeah,
And I keep thinking about the fact that our generation possibly has had a very interesting privilege of witnessing one of the most dramatic shifts in how we behave, the
yeah.
intersection of money, of technology, of social curve. Um, and I think you've had a front row view into that given your career. So I'm curious to know what led you to your current role at Big Basket and what is your current primary area of focus?
Sure. I run the monetization business at BigBasket, which essentially includes search ads, display ads, nudges, etc., etc. Obviously, we've just taken the first step with search ads. There's a lot more to go, right? And what I'm particularly sort of excited about, and I always sort of tend to look at this as my own ikigai, is that I think more than, let's say, the job or the company that I work for, right? What is so fascinating, at least for me, is this entire thing around human cognition and attention, right? Why do people perceive things? How do people perceive things? And what makes them perceive better or worse? And what makes them act on their perception? What are layers that can be molded around that, right? And these are things, for example, if you ask, for example, a cine director, right? Incidentally, one of my batchmates has turned a cine director, and he made NH10, Udta Punjab, and more recently Kora, right? And
Hmm.
so, if you're a director, right, you're looking at a scene and saying script is one portion, right? The characters are one portion, the atmosphere is one portion, the tropes are one portion, right? And
Hmm.
those small little things that you sort of embed, right, into that make sure that the viewer retains attention and, more importantly, associates the character with that symbol or trope or pillar, etc., right? These things are very fascinating. Of course, there's no sort of real science to it, but I think, obviously, needless to say, some of the great people, whether it's Steve Jobs or Steven Spielberg, or
Hmm.
more importantly, more recently, one of my favorite directors, David Fincher, who
Hmm.
made Fight Club, Seven, etc., right? Get some of these persistent tropes that get into your brain remarkably well,
Hmm.
right? So, for each of their movies, if you go back, you'll remember two or three things that just sort of stay with you for life, right? So, and I just find some of this fascinating, possibly because I grew up reading a lot of Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie, and I always used to think
Right.
the one piece that is always unanswered for, from a layman's standpoint on Sherlock Holmes is, hey, it's fine, you're able to do that line of reasoning. saying, look at that fellow's shoes. That fellow's shoes have mud, so hence he must have, for example, walked on clay. It rained in that place, so hence he must have gone there, etc., etc. Right? But what no one seems to ask is, how do you even decide what to look at? Why look at only shoe? Maybe look at shirt. Maybe look at something else, right? So how do you, out of 100 things in a frame, out of 50 things that you hear, out of 10 things that you're primed for, how do you even sort of begin to sort of perceive what you perceive, right? And I'm just saying that's an endless sort of fascination. For example, if I were to sort of take that view between, for example, print, right, versus TV versus digital, right? Print, you're giving it, you are giving the ad undivided time out of your own volition because
Mm.
you're choosing to turn that page out, right? Whereas in TV, somebody is inserting an ad while you're watching a, right? And this, for example, has ramifications in terms of what actually goes on into your processing, right? For a long time, like Lava said, viewability was used as a substitute for perception. But I could be staring through you and not even registering who you are or what you're seeing. And vice versa. I could be looking elsewhere. And I could be all ears and all senses.
And
Right.
thinking
So
about what I've seen. Yeah.
and I think the part with digital is now that you get so many screens and visual clues and sounds thrown at you, right? And everyone is just sort of using a proxy that a completed supply. When I say completed supply, that a page is fully loaded on a screen means I have looked at it. That's just so not true, right? Because I could be staring at somebody else, and I can't think of a single human being on this planet who has less than 4 or 5, tabs open, right? Apart from a WhatsApp, apart from, whatever else, right? So how do you even sort of make sense of this? And more importantly, right, sort of an extension of what you saw in the movie Minority Report, right? How will this all now fold back into ads as we see go forward, right? And I just think this, of course, is my sort of view that ads may no longer be ads. I think what is going to happen more and more and more is, given the amount of clutter that we have, eventually ads will become personalized nudges, right? How those nudges manifest themselves, and exactly at the point of time that it matters to you, will obviously evolve. I don't quite have obviously a good sense of it. Like, for example, this is the problem that Google is struggling with, right? Earlier, they were just throwing a table of contents on the search results, saying, hey, these are all the books in the library. Now you go figure. Now folks are asking, hey, I know if I have to search for electromagnetism, these are the 10 things, right? But I am looking for this specific subtopic in electromagnetism. Just peel me only that piece from any of these books and give it to me. Right? So I think libraries or troves of information are no longer troves of information. I think the distinction will be made based on how well they can contextualize.
Yeah,
and pull them in.
I think you touched upon a couple of things that are very dear to us on this podcast, and me personally, I'll tell you why. One is, like you said, there is just a barrage of content and advertising where effectively the amount of attention that's being tapped into and monetized is basically nearing the time itself. And we frequently on this ad sometimes touch up on this podcast, sometimes talk about the question, what is an ad? I think we have forgotten. It's long gone. The traditional concept of, not even in the print world, even in the television world, something that interrupts you. And like the original meaning of the word advertising, if I'm not mistaken, the root word comes from attention. And so in the world where a banner pops up and stops you from reading or consuming the content, is effectively trying to divert your attention without your permission.
Yeah.
And we've also been wondering about the concept of an ad. And I read a stat recently that said in a 24-hour period, the average human is subjected to 10,000 ads. Where is viewability going to be a proxy for attention or perception? Correct. I think that is long gone. Also, someone recently told me that if you go back and rewatch the movie Seven,
Mhm.
you will notice that David Fincher has chosen to use a handheld camera every time he's showing you
Correct.
Kevin
Yeah.
Spacey, and a
Yeah.
tripod or a mounted
Yeah.
camera for anybody else.
Yeah.
And I didn't know, and like you said, the great people know how to wield these two. They have
Yeah.
mastery over their craft, right? But the fact that there is an unstable character with an unstable camera, it never hit me back. And I must have seen that movie like 15 times
I don't know
at
if you
least.
know this. So actually, as a trivia in Fight Club, every time Edward Norton is shown,
Hmm.
Brad Pitt is also shown for a flickering second. He's
Ah, yeah.
shown such
Hmm.
that your perception of vision is faster than that, so you can't quite recognize it. So if you do a
This did
slow
it.
motion,
Yeah.
you would
Yeah.
actually see Edward Norton and Brad Pitt in each of the scenes in which he exists.
That reminds me of the movie Memento, where
Yeah.
at some point where the timing overlaps, there you start to see both people. Anyway, I think we can definitely talk about movies all day long. I want to dive a little deeper into what you touched upon, right? How do we know of all of these 100 things that we see? How do we know what is it that we perceive? What is it that whether or not we're looking at it is actually making its way into our brain? I was wondering in the context of retail itself, given where you operate.
Hmm.
Can you just start by explaining to us and to our listeners what behavioral economics is and what exactly framing and context priming, two concepts that are written in your LinkedIn bio and, of course, are passion, things that you're passionate about. What are these and how do they have an influence on our decisions to buy or take a certain action?
Yeah, sure. First, I'll start off saying a lot of what I've learned is through podcasts from Rory Sutherland, who I think he's done some really pioneering work. Uh, you know, uh, from Ogilvy in UK. In fact, he actually runs a behavioral sciences consulting unit, and they do some pretty splendid work
Hmm,
with especially on public policy. For example, and I always
hmm,
think that public policy is one of the hardest to solve for. For example, for example, try and see how you can prevent urination on a public wall, right?
hmm,
So does graffiti work? Does do, for example, you know the drawings of God's work, etc., etc., right? And these are very, very fascinating sort of examples. I think some of us, for example, have even heard of this fly experiment or that
hmm.
Heathrow used
Yes.
in the
Yeah.
London urinal to make sure
Yeah.
the cleaning processes,
Hmm,
the cleaners
hmm,
save a lot of time, right? And so on and so forth. It's just sort of all around us, like Newton said. We just sort of fail to observe it, right? And I'll
hmm,
just sort of take a step back.
hmm,
Essentially, think about it like this, right? You're willing to pay 200 rupees for a water bottle in a hotel room, comfortably ensconced on a white linen, right, watching TV. Whereas you whine about you having to pay for water when it sells for 20 rupees outside. Right? So
hmm,
what's happened between the two cases is you become more comfortable. Inertia is your default state, right, in a hotel, right? And you're surrounded by things that scream quietness and
hmm,
relaxation, right? So hence, your sort of somewhere in your mind, your willingness to pay a premium, not to take two steps extra, has
hmm,
gone up substantially. Right? Of course, I may be sort of oversimplifying it. I'm sure there are sort of better reasons, other reasons that we will discover as we go along. Right? So that's, for example, and that's example a way for someone to make sure you extract a premium or show better value for the product, right?
hmm,
And similarly, I've heard this from multiple offline retailers that you actually have a well lit, extremely wide showroom, right? People actually somehow feel that your product is A, premium, B, pure, and it's a well managed company, right? And of
hmm,
course, the master of that is Apple. This is just sort of basic color psychology.
yeah.
Right? So uh, I think where I'm sort of getting at is when someone is looking at something, right, and they're trying to cognite that, right? 4 or 5 things that impact that are your values and your culture, right? Which are the slowest to sort of change, right? So which are for the context and the environment, right? For example, culture and values remain the same irrespective of whether I am in a hotel room or outside, right? But the
Mhm.
context and the environment have changed, right?
Mm.
And three anchors. I am now used to, I know what, pasta costing 900, so a 200 rupee water bottle does not seem that expensive. It's like, you go to a Mercedes Benz for the same battery that that you would probably buy, for 4,000 in a Maruti, right? Cost you 12,000 bucks. So
Mm.
nothing has changed. Battery is the same. It's just that you probably get a little better white glove treatment, right? So
Mm.
anchors, right? And then how do you prime, right? What is prime meaning? Maybe, for example, right? Chances that you would pick up a water bottle. If I actually just had a card kept uh, on your bedside table that said, you get cashews, you get all this. By the way, you also get water. Obviously, get
Mm.
increased substantially, right? So, how do you make information right available to the person in a manner that you want him to decide on, right?
Mm.
Is
Mm.
really how information architecture and context priming work. Right? And
Mm.
there's this, theory called behavior is ultimately a function of means. It's called MAP. Right? I forget what the A is right now, but I'll just sort of look
Mm.
it up. But essentially, can you provide the means, right? Provide a nudge and provide a process for the guy to, drive this through, right? So, for
Mm.
example, just closer home, just to give you a couple of examples, when a website says, for example, you bought, let's say, product A, and they say,
Mm.
you may also like product B, right? CTRs are, let's say, zero point 0.5 or 0.7%. But if they say customers who bought this also bought this, CTR
Mm.
moves up to 1.2%. If they say must buy, it goes up to 1.4%. Right? If they
Mm.
say trending in Bangalore or trending in a place near you, it obviously goes up, right? Because people want to
Mm.
belong to a tribe or a group that they are a part of, right? And so on and so
Mm.
forth. And this is especially, for example, even more sort of material in conspicuous consumption categories like fashion or
Mm.
or retail, right? One of the things that I
Mm.
always find funny is that a bunch of websites still have their anchors or hero images of clothes, right? Whereas actually, when you're actually buying a cloth, you're not thinking of the clothing. You're actually thinking of how you would look in that,
Mm. Mm.
right? It's such an obvious sort of insight, right? And similarly with cars as well. Obviously, I think most this is now I guess an open insight, right? Nobody just now shows the features and the functions of the car, right? And you and me, for example, grew up in the 80s where fuel efficiency and engine power were what was paraded, right? On
Mm.
on
Mm.
newspaper ads, you would say, I'm getting
Mm.
10 kilometers to a liter. This has a 100 bhp engine, but none of these new age ads, or rather ads for these new age cars, ever talk about that. I think that's long past. They want you to sort of imagine how your own image or your own aspirational sort of
Mm.
lifestyle would improve if you drove that car, right?
Mm.
So I think that's how most industries move, right? From
Mm.
a function, from a basic utility to a differentiation on functionality to an emotional response to signaling. When I say
Mm.
signaling, at a Mercedes Benz, I guess 50% of the value that you pay to a Mercedes Benz is just for the logo, and just the
Mm.
fact that everybody else recognizes the logo to be Mercedes Benz. Right? And I always have
Mm.
this imaginary question: if there was an ultra niche luxury brand which nobody
Mm.
knew about, would people buy it as much? Right?
Mm.
I think it sort of is like a parabola where I think you sort of there is this Goldilocks zone in the middle where a BMW, Mercedes Benz, etc., sort of peak out on. And after that, there are these extremely esoteric sort of ultra luxury brands, right? Which are usually bought by people who don't want to be sort of identified on the road, right? Cars are great, but they don't want a car that screams that this is the Rolls Royce, right? So that,
Mm.
of course, becomes a very small niche. Where I'm sort of going with this is you need to understand where your market is and play
Mm.
according. Like, for example, I think pretty much thanks to what's happened in COVID, I think e-commerce is no longer about basic functionality and utility, which is why you've seen all these cashbacks, all of these, I will deliver quickly, etc., have all gone away, right? I think when I was working at Amazon, somebody said this, and it sort of stuck out with me that people come in for price,
Hmm.
right? Stay for the delivery experience and buy in the long term for the selection,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So, sort of selection is that. So, eventually, over a period of time, you want to see a large selection,
Hmm.
right? Half the value that Starbucks, I think, sort of shows to you is the fact that you can choose from over 200 coffees. Never mind
Hmm.
the fact that 99% of us end up buying one of the top three coffees, latte, cappuccino,
Hmm.
espresso, right? So I think it's that perception of choice and creating that,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
That is important, right?
Hmm.
At the first level. And now that you made sure that you have that perception of choice, what do you do to prime that person to make him or her move towards the intended direction,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Could it be social proof? Could it be because maybe my friend is buying it? Could it be because, hey, everyone else is buying it, so I might as well buy it, right?
Hmm.
So, if you ask someone who's buying a Maruti, which is probably me, I just say, look, I don't want to deal with any hassle. Everyone seems to be buying it. It's a hassle-free service, hassle-free car, so might as well sort of buy,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So I just want to belong to a broad sort of denominator, right?
Hmm.
That's for example, I am framing it. Right? Whereas somebody may want something that truly stands. In fact, there are lots of people who say, I don't want to buy a car that's common because I want to stand, right?
Hmm.
So they'll end up buying a unique car in a red or yellow. Right?
Hmm.
Or somebody might say, hey, I want to make sure, when I drive, there is a conspicuous sort of uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
signaling. Right? Maybe, it has a burble, it has an exhaust, it has one of these strobes that makes sure everyone on the road sort of turns back and looks at you. Right? All of us have these psychological sort of needs. How do you
Hmm.
sort of fulfill them, right? And how do you move them gently towards that direction,
Hmm.
right? Is where I think I personally think in the next 2, 3, 4 years, there's going to be a lot of work done.
Hmm.
Lots of companies, including Google, including some of these AI-driven companies, have said that I think the big sort of juice that happened by squeezing out data, which we saw between 2015 and 20, has pretty much gotten done. Right. So I think most people now understand what is big data. They have an analytics team. They know what is a segment, right? What is now more important is to marry that science with an acute understanding of consumer behavior and psychology,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Uh, so, uh, how many Jobses will we see across the industry who understand technology as a hygiene, but most importantly, they can sort of differentiate themselves through psychology. That's going to be the sort of fascinating,
Hmm. Hmm.
piece as far as digital ads is concerned. At least as far
Hmm.
as I go, right? So, for
Hmm.
example, lots of people come and say, hey, if we are now just so used to an Instagram image, right? If you actually make an e-commerce ad look like an Instagram image, I suspect it will get more attention, right? So, very similar to what the 7-Up Fido Dido said, normal is boring, right? How much will you stand out in a normal, right? If
Hmm.
you're also normal, right? How do you sort of gently peel away one layer to at least make yourself or your work stand out from the crowd? These are things I think that's going to happen definitely in the next couple of years or so.
Yeah. As you were running through that, my mind has gone to so many places and examples, right? Because I can keep thinking of this in not just my own behavior as a consumer, but also what I've been reading about lately. So this the shoe company, the shoe shop, Payless, you must have seen that example, right?
Yeah,
They set up a prank where they had a fancy looking white color showroom and people paid 10 times the price for the same shoe. There was there was a guy who wore a garbage bag and gate crashed a ramp of a fashion show, and the audience did not notice because and until one of the security guards noticed that he was not actually a model. There are just so many of these examples that we can keep thinking of. There was a guy last week who entered a €2 wine in a competition
yeah,
with all these €500 wines, where he just
correct.
replaced the label and it won. And it
Yeah,
won.
yeah, correct. Yeah, yeah. There's so much of this. I mean, a lot of our perception is essentially what we attach value to
Yeah.
because of our own sort of stereotypes, misconceptions, idiosyncrasies, culture, values, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah. Through all these examples that you have studied both out of academic interest as well as the nature of what you do, what are some common cognitive biases that we have that may span across all of humankind, different classes, different wealth levels? What are some common biases that we have? You
well, I
mentioned white
guess
showroom. That's one example.
I think all of us know it. I am no great academic. Confirmation bias, endowment bias, availability
Mm,
bias. We only look for things that are available, right? We are
mm,
prisoner of our own stereotypes. If you have seen
mm,
Rahul Dravid succeed very well, like for example, for a long time, I used to think I was sort of very anti T20 cricket.
mm,
So I think with hindsight, I was clearly wrong. Right?
mm,
So because you think something has happened,
mm,
in a way, and it's succeeded or led to an outcome, you think all outcomes from there on have to be in the same way. Right? So
mm,
uh, availability bias. Obviously, we only look for things that we are presented with.
mm,
These are some common biases.
mm, mm. Um, in the world of retail, e-commerce, marketplaces, companies like Amazon and BigBasket, how is this being leveraged to guide the customer in a certain direction? I've always wondered if, especially in the context of, like you said, right, people are also buying similar items. This is a must-buy item. This is a trending
Hmm.
item. What is the weightage in all of this, given to just giving you what you're looking for versus enabling discovery for you versus driving you in a certain direction? How are these businesses leveraging this to actually improve revenue? At the end of the day, I guess that's what everyone is going for.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll give you a few examples. Like for example, I think we find out that in a basket purchase like grocery, right? People have anyway decided to commit to purchase 4 or 5 items, right? So the friction to add another 2 or 3 in the basket, which normally in an offline store you would just add because you get to walk around and supply creates its own demand, right?
Hmm,
Does not happen online, right? So I think almost every single retailer that we have spoken to in the West says, hey, pass the customer at the preview basket before he or she checks out. Very similar to what a waiter actually does to you in a restaurant, right? After you finished ordering, he'll come back and say, hey, the chef has just made this great
hmm,
kheer or whatever, right?
hmm,
Please try it. God knows whether
hmm,
he's trying to sort of palm off something that isn't selling or whether it's genuinely
hmm,
so. But, of course, I'm just joking. And
hmm,
chances are you probably will buy it, right?
hmm,
And many years back, I met somebody from L'Oreal who said that I think L'Oreal, for example, is one of the brands that benefits quite a lot from this because nobody actually goes into a salon for anything beyond a haircut or a hair color. But
hmm,
of course, once
hmm,
you're under the knife, the beautician says, sir, whatever, your gray looks odd. Do you want this? Do you want some steaming, etc., etc.?
hmm,
Because you are anyway committed to it, right? And
hmm.
suddenly, the $1,000 that he would have probably
Yeah.
asked for, right, does not look that bad,
Yeah.
right? To
In,
you.
interestingly, as I was getting my most recent haircut, I asked the guy. I said, "How do you learn all the new trends and cuts that people ask for?" And I said, "Do you learn it online? Do you keep getting training?" He said, "Once a month, L'Oreal takes us and trains us,
Hmm.
and they
Hmm.
also tell us how to push their products. But in the as a quid pro quo, they train us in all these new things." So I have a recent conversation around the same thing.
Yeah. So, and of course, when the customer enters a website or a store, right, what you always do is make sure your key value item is is seen as significant value, right? So,
Mm,
ironically enough, offering an onion at 50% discount might help you drive traffic, even
mm,
if and eventually, maybe the customer is even willing to pay a premium for a broccoli or a zucchini, right? So,
mm,
because no one's thinking of the substantial saving that you can get on a 200 rupee broccoli.
mm, mm,
It's onion, potato, tomato, cooking oil,
mm,
rice,
mm,
sugar that actually drive perception, which is like, I think
mm,
it's a well sort of thought out trick. Of course, I think,
mm,
most offline retailers would tell you that I think this is all baked into the way, the store is laid out. Right? They essentially
mm,
make sure that You pass through food counters where the aroma sort of seeps out. Items that you would buy anyway are always kept at the end of the shop, so that you end up
mm,
passing through non-discretionary, so rather discretionary items, a deo or
mm,
a talcum powder, before you actually walk up all the way to the aisle to buy a buy a cooking oil, right?
mm,
So essentially, and of course, I think some of us may have heard this IKEA example about how they purposefully make sure that the shop is sort of like a maze without any windows, because they don't want you to see daylight, because then you will get a sense of how long you spent, right? And they
mm,
make sure that you meander through the store. And
mm.
usually some of these, trinkets and some of these smaller items are always kept towards the end, so that you end up passing through a big sofa that you don't need,
Yeah.
before you eventually make your way around to, let's say, a bedside lamp that costs only 1,000 bucks, right? So essentially, how do you improve availability, right?
Mm,
Availability being a bias, because normally if I just kept the bedside lamp right at the entrance, the customer would just pop in, buy that, and then check out, right?
mm, mm,
Now he or she has to wait through a longer route, right? And
mm,
what obviously then they try and do is intersperse some of these larger ticket size items with trinkets, right?
mm,
Smaller stuff. So you end up buying a lot of stuff for, let's say, 500,000 bucks. So you're sort of pre-committed, and that's how, if you sort of look at some of these metro, I mean, these large hypermarts work, right? You end up buying
mm,
lots of these sundry stuff. Then you see one
mm.
large stuff that you don't necessarily need, and say, I've made all of this trip, might as well just buy this because probably it's on a discount, or what have
Mm,
you, right? So
mm,
I think essentially, how do you sort of pipe information, make it available, build anchors. For example, you could, I mean, the most common thing that everyone does this, they have a price, they strike that off and show you another price, right? Which is
mm.
anchoring, right? Is that price really true? Nobody knows, right? Or they just say,
Mm,
this is a market price, right? Or, for example, what they probably do is bundle two things together and make it look optically cheaper. Of course, the past master
mm,
of this is Amazon. I think their Prime program is just so exceptionally well bundled. It encompasses free music, free movies, free shipping, free delivery, free, I know what, downloads, etc., etc. So you just have no idea what part of that value would you even attribute towards free movies,
yeah.
what part towards free shipping, and what parts towards music, right? So all of them feed off each other. Somebody comes in for free shipping, watches free movies. Somebody comes in for free movies, starts buying stuff because it's free shipping, and
Mm,
they end up obviously buying and also using the music podcast as well, right? So I
mm,
think essentially these are some sort of old tricks, right? Make things appear as easily as possible in front of the customer's eyes, provide anchors so that the customer feels there is obviously value.
mm,
All of us have heard about this iPhone 64, 128, and 256 being priced the way they are, right? Usually, what most car manufacturers do is they stretch the price of the top end variant as much as possible. They keep a modestly priced mid variant, so people end up committing to the mid variant, and then they go through these pangs, and
mm.
they eventually say, I'm going to buy a car only once in 10 years or whatever. So I
Only
might
one.
as well just go to, yeah,
Mm,
I'll go to the
mm,
top end area, right? Where typically margins are better. Or they end up
mm,
bundling stuff, right? Most car dealers will tell you that they don't make many money on cars. They make money only on the extended warranty, the AMC, and
mm,
the insurance,
mm,
right? These are not
mm,
things that you even think about. Everyone tries to
mm,
negotiate the price, the ex-showroom price of the car. But
mm,
what is probably even more chunkier in terms of margin is actually the cost of the insurance on the
mm,
cost of whatever AMC or
mm,
extended warranty, right? So,
mm,
and the last thing is after anchors is social proofing and tropes, right?
mm,
So, what are
mm,
ways and means in which you could sort of make
mm,
them perceive value in this product? It could be a direct sort of functional comparison with a competitor, which is what insurance companies would do because it's a very rational sort of product, or it could be an
mm,
emotional sort of
mm,
you know thing, saying a Google Pixel might say, I'm giving you unlimited storage to store all of your photos. An iPhone might
mm,
say, hey, simplicity is my thing, right? So you choose between these, right? And these don't
mm,
necessarily have to be contrasting on the same axis, which is
mm,
what makes this fascinating. So it's a multi-dimensional multipolar sort of problem, right? Is the simplicity of Apple better than the unlimited storage of a Google Pixel photo? I don't. I guess these are two different audiences, right? So
Yeah.
that's how it sort of. These are some things that work. That everyone's sort of trying to build on. The last thing I forgot to mention is the more you can do to resolve the ambiguity, right, and the uncertainty that the customer sort of faces, right, the better it is, right? So, like, for example, a lot of guys, I don't know, I heard the story about LinkedIn, and I have this fascination for sort of filing in all of these examples. For a long time, they were trying to sell this LinkedIn premium subscription, and maybe it was LinkedIn, maybe it was somebody else. A lot of these guys say, hey, first month is free, and your card won't get charged until after the first month, right? Lots of times people had this sort of worry that I'm giving you my card number right now. What if you just charge it straight away, right? And some companies even take it to the next sort of extent, saying we will give you a notification before charging the card, so that you can choose to not actually pick up the subscription after the free month or whatever, right? Of course, I think the whole sort of thesis is that we are just so caught up and busy with our lives.
We'll forget.
What we would have probably scrounged for, we just sort of go into this, deadbeat mode, which is how, I suspect you have a lot of these subscriptions, right? I bought a YouTube subscription just to listen to something. It's been running on for 3 years, because after a while I said, it's okay. It's a few $100. So might as well just sort of run with it. I think inertia is an exceptionally good sort of tool, right? The more you can do to break the initial inertia, and and make that sort of persistent, the better the end results are. So I think these are some things that I can think of. Closer home on public policy, I think on when we try to do some work for the metro, one of the things that often metro passengers actually said was, these metro stations just look like rectangular boxes. Why would you not have an LED board that has the ETA of the next train and the ETD of the next train? And more importantly, in fact, one suggestion that really sort of caught my attention was, hey, usually the pivot point for somebody to try a metro could often be that, let's say you're running late to go to the airport or go to Majestic, right? So it's raining, you're in a cab, or you're about to think of taking a cab. You don't know if you will actually reach Majestic on time if you took a cab, right? At that point of time, you're willing to try the metro, right? But what's stopping you? You don't know when the next train is, and you don't know when it will reach Majestic, right? So someone actually said, why don't you just frame it saying ETD, whatever, expected time to go to Majestic on the metro is 23 minutes, by road is 46 minutes, and just flash that all 4 sites, right? What you eventually are doing is, you essentially are figuring out an inelastic travel plan, right? And using that as an ingress for people to try out their first metro, right? If I just said, hey, save fuel, go green, etc., people would say, it's okay. We'll think about it, right? But now I have to get to the airport in the next half an hour. It's a inelastic, defined, clear need. I have to do it. There is no alternative. At this point of time, I'm willing to bend. But you essentially have to resolve the ambiguity about whether I will reach the airport on time, right, in the next 30 minutes, right? So that often could be like a great sort of trope, right? Imagine the number of people who want to go to college on time, want to go to a high court hearing on time, you want to go to office on time because there's a 9 o'clock meeting that's starting, etc., right? Why should metro boards be just a number? Why can't they be framed saying reach your office meeting on time in the morning? Right? I mean, then I suspect a lot of people might.
Which people care about far more than it being green and it being a responsible.
Correct, absolutely, right? You have, let's say, a review with your skip boss at 9:30, and you're leaving your house at 8:45. Google Maps is showing you 9:33. right?
Hmm.
How many times has this happened to you, right? And you don't know if 933 will become 943 or 953. You're pretty sure
Yeah.
933 will never become 923,
Hmm.
right? So these are obviously, I think you have to figure out what's that one piece,
Hmm.
right? That could even be an unmanifested sort of need that you can
Hmm.
get a leverage,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? So, and I keep thinking, right? And I travel quite a lot, and I actually thought the other way to frame it in when I go to Dubai or London, right? You actually take a metro express to go to the airport,
Hmm.
right? I actually thought, why don't you do the security check-in within the metro
Hmm.
and provide that as an incentive?
Hmm.
Because that, right, will,
Of course.
if you go to some of these airports, right, thousands of cars come in and go out, and there's persistent honking, all kinds of confusion, right? uh, Imagine you just said, for those folks who come by metro, you get the security check done in the metro, and no one, and this is anyway the last stop, right?
Hmm.
And in any case, most of these metros also do a security check even before you board the metro,
Hmm.
right? And it saves you time. You're just sort of getting straight into the heart of the airport, right? And that just becomes a hook for you to ditch the car or get dropped at a station that is not necessarily close to that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. As opposed
So
to willingly going and putting yourself through the pain of the honking and then the security lines and everything else. It's kind of like what Abu Dhabi achieved at the airport, right? You do the US immigration in Abu Dhabi itself.
yeah,
They
correct, correct,
they somehow
absolutely,
tapped
right?
into the fact that when you land in the US, that it's a very painful process,
Yeah,
whereas you get it done
correct,
right here.
yeah. So
Um,
there are so many things. It's like I said, we just,
it's all around us. The more we start, and I'm sure after this conversation, I will continue to just observe it everywhere, and also catch myself falling prey to
yeah.
various traps that have been set around me. Right, I'm sure. I had two questions for you on the role of advertising in
Mhm.
this. Um, Everything you've talked about applies in obviously multiple realms, applies to certain target audiences, but at some point is also going to push someone from one group to another depending on their willpower, so to speak. It sounds like people with high willpower are not desired anymore in this, right? Because you have the ability to say, no, I will not pay 200 rupees for this bottle of water. I will bring my own bottle of water from home. Or what the other trick that I have been taught, which is you don't call room service, you call housekeeping. Then they
Yeah,
give you
correct,
free water
correct.
at a
Yeah.
hotel, right? But there are people who have figured it out. But I'm guessing
And
people
I
with
do
willpower are
even
not.
cheaper stuff. Now I carry a water bottle around. So I give the water bottle
Yeah,
and say, fill it. Right.
yeah,
And
yeah,
obviously
yeah.
they don't have a water fountain, right? So they just pour that into this and give it back to me. So
Yeah. Um, but very clearly, this has been studied and applied for decades. And I'm curious to know, at the intersection of this as a general consumer experience, as well as ads, especially in the world of retail, both offline and online, in today's world, given so much noise,
mm,
so much that we are being forced to see this barrage of experiences, data, ads, what is the role that advertising is playing today in this experience? Is it helping us cut through the clutter and get the signal out of the noise? Is it supercharging the experience? Is it, what is the primary role of advertising today, or is it the same it has always been?
I think for a long time, advertisement was seen as something. See, there was this theory in the 1940s, 50s, the Kotler era, that our brain has these bunch of pigeonholes. There's a pigeonhole for detergent. If I am serf, I hammer hard
Mm,
at you. I hammer hard at you
mm,
day in, day out on newspapers to get my pigeon into that pigeonhole. Usually, and there is this other whatever stereotype, good, bad saying, usually each pigeonhole can't take more than one or two pigeons. So you try and be those one or
mm,
two brands, which is what is this
mm,
top of mind recall, right? What can you
mm,
pick up? Top of mind, unaided recall, etc., etc. Right? It's like you can just pick up those pigeons straight off the pigeon, right? But I think, given what has happened, right, more and more of our ROM has become RAM.
mm. Okay.
Maybe you and me still remember a surf or whatever, right? But the younger
Mm,
generation is probably saying, why do I even need to remember?
mm,
Which is where I think you see the roles of platforms becoming more and more important, right? You're not saying I want to order Thai rice, right? You're saying,
mm,
let me go to Zomato and figure out.
mm.
right? So which is obviously the reason why in the last 10, 12, 15 years you've seen the rise of third party marketplaces which do this crisscross, and
Hmm.
obviously the rise of retail media. That's how I sort of rationalize it, saying nobody now wants to remember stuff.
Hmm.
People are looking for cash, right?
Hmm.
Slash RAM, right? I want a detergent, just tell me 2, 3 things that are available, that are relevant and meet my expectations.
Hmm.
Now don't expect me to remember them thereafter. Each time I need it, I will ask you, just be my friendly assistant, just chirp in, which is essentially the role that retail media sort of plays. Right?
Hmm.
I'm just thinking that is assuming I want to buy soap.
Hmm.
But I think like Uber came and changed the experience. Actually, I'm interested in buying soap or a detergent. I'm interested in cleaning clothes.
Hmm.
Right? How will this change? I don't know. I mean, I am no great sort of prescient guy. So could it be Surf regaining back some leverage, saying, I am a brand that helps you clean your clothes,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? Or will it be a platform that says, you want something, a solution that helps you clean your clothes, right?
Hmm.
I'm not so sure. But what I'm reasonably sure of is the specificity.
Hmm.
Okay, what I'm sure of is the pigeonhole sizes are decreasing. Whether they're going away or not, I don't know. And we certainly are not going to have 200 pigeonholes with 2 pigeons each.
Hmm.
I think we will probably go down to 20 pigeonholes with 1 pigeon each, equivalent,
Okay.
right?
Hmm.
So if you look at some of the younger generation, including my own daughter, they'd say, I know Instagram, I know Amazon. You want, a room deodorant, I'll get it from Amazon, right?
Hmm.
Why do I need to remember that Odonil is a room deodorant that I need to buy, right? I will
Hmm.
just buy what is available, right? So these purchase cycles that involved priming, remembering, stewing over, and then picking up that brand back.
Hmm.
Sort of like what happened in a post office, right? Mail comes in, you sort it, then you pick
Hmm.
it up
Hmm.
based on street. It's all now
Hmm.
become straight through process because it's all
Hmm.
data, right?
Hmm.
There's no sort of physicality to it, right?
Hmm.
So essentially, decisions have become more compressed, faster,
Hmm.
with no muscle memory of the choices that have been made.
Therefore, advertising.
I don't know. I also
Hmm.
don't know. So, but I'm just saying advertising will certainly become more and more nudges that
Hmm.
solve a problem, right?
Hmm.
Not say I'm a detergent,
Hmm.
right? I suspect 10 years later, I may actually say, look, I've spilled some ketchup
Hmm.
on my shirt.
Hmm.
How do I clean it?
No, but but like you're saying, if we are heading to an era or are already at an era where we don't want to do all that thinking, right? If you're saying ROM has become RAM, essentially, right? Where either we have become more or less perceptive or more or less lazy. I'm not. Jury is still out. But if I just want the straight through process,
Hmm,
then advertising the right nudge can effectively find us at that spot. And it sounds to me like it is definitely going to declare, get us the signal from the noise. Except that in this era, it can also know where we are and what we bought last. It has a lot more context.
correct,
Um, as opposed to the ad in the sort of supermarket that is promoting a specific product, right?
correct.
But
So,
the other
I mean,
question I had is, no, go
sorry,
ahead.
I mean, an extension of that is I think you're seeing yields go up on ads that can overlay one first party data,
Yes,
which is
yes, of
like
course.
saying, see, there was this phase that we went through where there was so much supply, prices crashed,
Hmm.
right? Saying you could get 20 rupees CPM, etc., etc. Now I think people are saying, I don't need so much.
Hmm.
I want detergent. I don't need 200 brands of detergent. Just tell me 2, 3 that are relevant to me that I have bought in the past that are relevant to a tropical country like India that can help solve a darkened collar problem.
Hmm.
Right? Don't give me tight pots that work
Hmm.
well in a temperate
Hmm.
climate. Right? So you get the drift. Right?
Hmm.
I think
Hmm.
there's this thing of like even in the Western economies now, people are going through this, Mary Kondo thing of like, I don't need so
Hmm.
much. Can I just sort of shrink my choices, right,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
create some
Hmm.
space, which I guess is something that most of us do as we sort of
Yeah.
age, right? So I think so. Essentially, what is going to happen is you're going to have fewer ads, but they'll be more
Mm,
thoughtful and relevant, and the
mm.
prices for those will go up,
Yes. Yeah.
right? So think of it like the hamburger problem. Earlier, you were just selling buns. Buns
Mm,
were cheap, aplenty. Now you don't want a bun; you just want a hamburger. The more the number of layers you can put, patty, cheese, etc., make it very, very sort of
mm,
contextual and personalized. Instead of a bun, two buns being sold for 5 rupees each, you're getting a hamburger for $200. Only it includes a patty and a cheese in
mm.
between that cost XXX. Right. So
Yeah.
I think that is probably what we're going to sort of see.
Yeah. Um, Consumers always worry that ads are manipulating them. But if you look at cognitive psychology, especially in the world of retail, it sounds like for decades people have been trying to figure out consumers. And you might call it manipulation, but it's mostly at scale. How do you figure out? How do you
Correct.
cluster? How do you get to the right? How do you get your message to the right customer? Right?
Correct.
W- What is it that has resulted in the advertising industry having a negative image as opposed to retail where everybody's okay? You know that you drive to the store, you'll have to walk to the corner to get your milk, and on your way back, exit to the gift shop. Nobody really cares about it. Nobody finds it overly manipulative, right? It's just become
Mm.
so normal. Whereas the minute you go look for a mattress and next day Amazon shows you a mattress, people are like, "Ah, they are following me, they are spying on me. I need to put an ad blocker in place." What is it that has resulted in advertising getting a negative PR, whereas cognitive psychology has been an applied science in
I
many
think that
fields?
is because you just sort of answered it yourself, right? In the
Hmm,
former, you were in the frame of mind to actually buy. That ad was shown during your buying experience box,
hmm,
right? Just because I was in a frame of mind to buy a mattress, then it doesn't mean I am in a frame of mind to buy a mattress every minute thereafter, right?
hmm,
There's obviously a thin line. I know, I mean, obviously, as a marketeer, as an advertiser, you'd say, I need to chase it. But
hmm,
what is a Goldilocks zone
hmm,
in which this can happen?
hmm,
For example, to be sort of specific, if I this is where sort of priming and information architecture comes in, right? Let's say, for example, I
hmm,
know Anand went to I know what says search for a mattress, right? Instead of me saying please buy this mattress, why can't you say 10 tips to choose the mattress, your
hmm,
right mattress? Prime me, right? Sponsored by XXX, right? Say if these are the 4 or 5 mattresses that you should choose, let me help you buy the best discount on these
hmm,
4 or 5 mattresses that fit you. Is a little more
hmm,
progressive, right?
hmm,
uh, which I think is something that I have been sort of endlessly thinking about, saying why should digital ads get judged pretty much on straight conversions, right?
hmm,
If you're a cricketer, if you've if you've done any if you've undergone any sort of coaching, nobody even expects you to bat for 6 months. First
hmm,
6 months is like you pad up, learn the technique, improve your
hmm,
stamina, improve your whatever, improve your hand-eye coordination, learn to catch the
hmm,
ball, etc., etc. Right? I think we may be, obviously, because we are a society that is becoming more and more in a hurry. We are
hmm,
getting too obsessed with the output,
hmm,
right? Without necessarily sort of worrying about the intermediate steps.
hmm,
In some sense, I think Google solved it by making the transition from Yahoo ad CPM into a CTR, right? But
hmm.
thanks to the clutter, click today is probably not fully indicative of
Not
intent
enough.
to buy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And thanks to dark patterns, etc., you may even be clicking without even outside of your own volition, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so, how do you solve for it? Is there a better way to do it? Like, for example, I think some of these guys have tried stuff like, can you play a game, spin a wheel? Someone's not
Hmm,
going to spin a wheel unless that person is not fully sort of giving you undivided attention, right? How do you
hmm,
get that,
hmm.
right? Is something that I think is an endlessly sort of fascinating experience.
Yeah.
Like, for
Yeah.
example, 2 or 3 things that I can think of that are completely sort of still unused or sounds. right? All of us remember the Airtel jingle. All of us remember the Paytm Karo tune, right? Everyone is looking at ads as a visual sort of appeal,
Hmm.
right? Anyone who grew up in the 80s and 90s would know the Nirma ad, the jingle, etc., right?
Of
I think
course.
sounds are, of course, another sort of one way to look at it. Could there be something else, right? Could there be aroma? Obviously, we still can't do it. You can't
Hmm.
pipe aroma over the internet.
Hmm.
But could there be something else that attracts your senses? In the US, I think there's this concept of ASM, or autonomous sensory motor reflex, right? So where you're saying, I want to sell food. Can I show
Hmm.
you, slurping sounds, or
Hmm.
the straw sucking sound, right? So essentially,
Hmm.
what are those? Those are essentially tropes, very similar to a David
Yeah.
Fincher movie, right? I want to
Yeah.
sell you a juice. I have to actually think that. Sorry, I have to actually make you think of a juice.
Hmm.
Rather drinking a juice, right? So that's
Yeah.
what I would do, right?
Yeah.
So those are the things that I guess will happen.
Yeah.
Why should ads just be limited to the sense of seeing,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? Can the cognition be improved through smell? I don't know. Smell looks too far away, but
Hmm.
hearing,
Hmm.
and maybe any of the other senses. Obviously, it can't
Yeah.
be full given the limitations of the internet as it exists today,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, that's certainly fascinating. Um, Last couple of questions before we round this off. In your world at Big Basket, how does all of this get applied? Is it in the way the product is laid out? Is it in the way your recommendation engine works? Is it through nudges, notification? Is it through how you interplay ads with regular recommendations? What are the various tools you have to apply all of this as you study your customers' behavior?
firstly, I think these are a lot of what I've told you is sort of stuff that I do outside of work.
Hmm.
Right? I think
Hmm.
at Big Basket, we do take baby steps.
Hmm.
Essentially, for example, right? I think trying to understand if we can blur the line between ads that are typically get siloed as branding ads and performance ads.
Hmm.
Right. So far, ads have been construed into two different silos without being joined at the hip, saying, either you do CPM or video, which means brand recall improves, right? Or you just do performance ads, which means you improve sales.
Hmm.
Or there, for example, ways to merge both of them, right?
Hmm.
Is, for example, one experiment. Or there ways to sort of, I won't say ads, but what could be sort of ways for us to talk to you through
Hmm.
personalized coupons, scratch cards, etc., etc. Like, I don't know if you know about this. I think like like the GPay experiment showed, if you make people, right,
Hmm.
do something
Hmm.
and then get a small variable reward,
Hmm.
people go gangbusters, right?
Hmm.
So essentially it's the Kinder Joy sort of effect, right? Most kids
Hmm.
want to buy Kinder Joy not for the chocolate, because they discover a surprise sort
Yeah.
of
Yeah. Yeah.
cartoon within it, right? That
Yeah.
discovery, that hunting for the treasure is the bigger joy than consuming the chocolate itself, right? That it
Hmm.
comes with chocolate is just
Hmm.
an incidental sort of stuff, right? And there are
Hmm.
so many
Hmm.
such products, designed like that, right? So could that, for example, be used, right? Where I say, hey, you've shopped so far, Anand, you scratch this card, right?
Hmm.
Figure out for yourself how much you got as a discount. And for you to use this discount, you need to shop for another
Hmm.
500 more, right? So
Hmm.
sort of like bundling, dynamic pricing, right?
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
talking to you on
Hmm.
the fly. Do you want to call these ads, nudges, promotions? I don't know. That's why I think
Yeah. Yeah.
these will,
Hmm.
the lines between inorganic ad, an
Hmm.
organic nudge, and a
Hmm.
paid promotion
Hmm.
will blur. All of these three lines will essentially sort of cross and become an integrated sort of communication. Like, for
Hmm.
example, I always used to run this thought experiment in my mind saying, hey, let's say, for example, you looked at a sofa, right, for 20K
Hmm.
and you chose not to buy it,
Hmm.
right? What should the guy do? Should he remind you saying, drop the price by 2K and say, hey, here is a deal that's evaporating, buy it,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? Or should he say, hey, this sofa is being purchased by 200 others, so buy it?
Yeah.
Or should he
Hmm.
say, that there are only 5 more sofas left and
Hmm.
none will be made after that?
Hmm.
Or should he say this sofa is great for a week back?
Hmm.
Or should he say that, this sofa is trending in Bangalore?
Hmm.
Or should he say that, this sofa plus another chair that you would have bought for 5,000 is now available to you together for, whatever, 20,000?
Hmm.
Right? I don't know. I mean, the only way to figure that out
Yeah.
is to run these experiments at scale, right? I think thanks to Midjourney, I think some of that is going to come alive very soon,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? So, because earlier the creative process, which used to be often the slowest sort of uh, part
Hmm.
of this entire thing, which was the
Yeah.
bottleneck, is
Yeah.
now very, very fast.
I asked Lavakumar a question around peeking into the future, and much like what you just said, um, the stable diffusion models are what he believes are going to be far more applicable. And in his opinion, he said the creatives of the future will not be fetched; they will be generated on the fly.
Correct. Correct.
Midjourney has kind of helped us get there faster, in the sense that we're able to run all these experiments at scale without waiting for a creative process. But as he was speaking into the future, one of the things he believes is that in future, these models itself, with far more context, with boundaries, will be, and with the ability to have enough computational horsepower, will generate creatives on the fly. And I think that that can actually be a game changer. So I will throw that question to you as well, Vardha, before we close this podcast episode out. With generative AI, stable diffusion models, we are possibly at the cusp of a new general purpose technology. It always tickles me that they have called it GPT aptly, right? With the hope
Yeah.
that that's what it will eventually become. Um, with a powerful technology like this becoming more and more democratized and accessible, what is the impact that it will have on the application of cognitive psychology? One of the things, like you just mentioned, is what Midjourney has already done. But
Yeah.
where is all of this going? What is 5 years, 10 years from now? What is it that today we are unable to fathom? That's
I think
actually right around
essentially,
the corner.
essentially a lot of these high margin services, right, which were founded on fine human judgment,
Hmm.
right? Like, for example, management consulting, investment banking, creative work, artistry, etc., right? Will eventually get disrupted because a lot of you being a good painter, right, is essentially you just distilling learnings from the thousands of paintings that you've done. So now the machine
Mhm.
just does that, right? So obviously there will still be a lot of finishing to be done. There will be,
Hmm.
there will be sort of finessing that needs to get done, right?
Hmm.
So for a long time, I think we as humankind struggled with with processes that were at the intersection of art and science,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
they could not be assembly line, rather,
Hmm.
they could not be transported to an assembly line,
Hmm.
because painters used to believe that each painting is a bespoke, beautiful piece of art, right? So very similar to, I guess, what we all believed, before Henry Ford said, car just means four doors, five tires. I will just assemble it. Why should one
Hmm.
guy assemble all of these by
Hmm.
himself, right? Over a period of 5 days, 50 guys will do only one thing, and each car will come out in 15 minutes instead of 5 days,
Hmm.
right? I think that to me is a hugely, you know, disruptive sort of experience. So a lot of stuff that we take for granted. Sometimes I always think I have to register for a webinar, fill up the same form, fill up the same name, etc., etc.
Hmm.
Can somebody just do all of this for me as a personal assistant? Keep track
Hmm.
of it and tell me exactly, saying log into this webinar, do this, pay the electricity bill,
Hmm.
etc., etc. That future is almost here. It will happen in the next
Hmm.
5 6 months, right? So what
Hmm.
it then does is, hopefully you can get a little more time for creative thinking,
Hmm.
provided you have the bent of mind for it. But it's so easy for you to obviously fall back and
Yeah.
not do that, right? So, uh, like, for example, I think somebody gave me this example saying to you, after the Industrial Revolution, right? During the Industrial Revolution, essentially some of these elites of Europe found a lot more time to enjoy music, do
Hmm.
fine arts, etc., right? It's no coincidence that the peak of Renaissance
Hmm.
also happened alongside, you know, I won't say peak of Renaissance. The Industrial Revolution essentially gave rise to a little more time for people to pursue stuff that was not necessarily of today's utility, but had profound long-term implications, like space travel or sketching or music or something, etc., etc. Right? So that could potentially happen, in the next 10, 15 years. I am obviously no soothsayer. I am myself an average sort of Joe. But I think just let's say Google and Microsoft getting smart, right, will, for example, save you and me tons of time that you would have spent on a PPT or an Excel. Right? Where do you
and it's up to
use
us to decide where to use that time. No, but I like the premise, because you're saying much like what happened during the Renaissance or right after the Industrial Revolution. There was a sudden availability of time, and some people chose to be creative and do great things with it. Some people became lazy. Some people became greedier and ended up working more. And everyone goes their separate ways. It's kind of a repeat of that entire stretch of time in an upgraded era. We are already benefiting from time saved because there are so many tools to use. And like you said, we're not far from this assistant that can do a lot for us, right? I have already started heavily leveraging like Mid-Journey and tools. The other day I didn't make a deck at all. I just generated it and used it, and it did a half decent job. It was for some internal presentation, so it was okay. But the point is, I would have otherwise spent like 2 hours like poring over that deck and trying to fine tune every little thing on it. So I definitely think we are either close or already at that era. And I like the premise that over the next few years, what we do with that time saved is again going to repeat what happened in the Renaissance. And I think that's interesting. So on that note, I wanted to close this podcast, and I must thank you for your time. This has been a most enlightening conversation.
Thanks. I mean, I don't know if it was any useful. I mean, I just enjoyed sort of blurting out whatever little I knew.
And to be honest,
a bunch of this does not even have anything to do with my sort of day job. It's just stuff that fascinates
me. Which is what we like as well, right? The reason we set up this podcast is because we just love to jam, and we just decided to do it. And in fact, some of our very scripted and sort of focused episodes are the less enjoyable ones, to be honest. The more fun ones to do are this, and even the people who listen in tend to agree with that. So I think it is definitely going to pique a lot of people's curiosity to go and explore more around what you already find fascinating and what you spend a lot of your time reading. And I think for that, I must thank you. You've definitely helped pick that curiosity, even for me and for Santosh, who's listening in. So thank you, Varadha, and we look forward to meeting you again sometime soon.
Sure.
But thank you for the time.
Thanks, Anand. Thanks, Santosh.